In his 1950 book, The Greeks and Their Gods, Scottish classical scholar W.K.C. Guthrie identified the sun god Apollo as the embodiment of the Hellenic spirit. An eternally youthful deity and a favorite among later poets, Apollo is usually depicted as crowned with laurels that symbolize victory and wearing a purple robe that symbolizes nobility. A god of multiple roles and significance, as Apollo Pythios he serves as the patron deity of Delphi, an oracular god as well as the patron of sailor and seafarers, refugees, and fugitives. As Coronis, the guardian of young people, Apollo oversees children's health and education, as well as watching over their journey to adulthood. Apollo also presides over all music, songs, dance, and poetry as the founder of string music as well as the constant companion of the Muses, serving as their chorus leader in festivals. Apart from his already wide-ranging functions, there is still more to Apollo than meets the eye. Apollo is also an important pastoral deity as the patron of herdsmen and shepherds. His primary duties included protection of herds, flocks, and crops from diseases, pests, and predators. Apollo also promoted the formation of new cities and the development of a civil constitution. He was looked upon as the lawgiver, as his oracles were consulted in a city before the setting of laws and regulations. Despite all his wonderful functions and qualities, ancient Greek tragedies portray Apollo with a completely different characterization. Although the chorus praises him in cultic scenes, the voice of tragic characters usually portray him as an awful god who lacks all the measure generally attributed to his Delphic aspect of moderation. Midena agan, nothing in excess, is even inscribed in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. At the very least, as are all the gods portrayed in tragedy, Apollo is portrayed as ambivalent. Standing beyond the sphere of humanity, these ambivalent gods cannot be comprehended within human categories, as they are neither good nor bad. As a result, instead of being the one to turn to for help in the tragic play, the ambivalent god tends to become a terrible threat for mankind. Apollo, in particular, forces some characters into tragic situations, and then, even when he participates in the action, seems to be strangely detached, remaining as ever the god who only watches from afar, without really participating in the event. Apollo's character is very similar to that of his opposite Dionysus. Like the very dramatic Dionysus, Apollo also seems to float between extreme polarities. He can be both violent and gentle at the same time. He is both dark and bright, near and far, polluting and purifying, infecting and healing, integrating and devastating. Although Apollo's arrows protect, they also bring deadly plagues. Although Apollo purified men from their guilt, he also punished them of it. In the Iliad, armed with his arrows, Apollo is both the healer as well as the bringer of death and disease, in a fashion somewhat similar to Rudra, the Vedic god of disease and personification of terror, who also favors the arrow as his weapon to inflict destruction. It was perhaps this ambivalence which brought Apollo closer to the hearts of the people. A belief was gradually developed that Apollo was the god who accepted repentance as an atonement for sin, who pardoned the contrite sinner, and who acted as the special protector of those who had committed a crime and are paying the price to society. For the Hittite and Hurrian people in the Late Bronze Age, from 1700 to 1200 BC, Aplu was a god of plague. Aplu, the son of, was a title given to the god Nergal, the god of war, plague, and disease, who was linked to the Babylonian god of the sun Shamash. In the Iliad, Apollo's priest prays to Apollo Smintheus, the mouse god who retains an older agricultural function as the protector from field rats, thus also indicating Apollo's power over animals. Incidentally, in the ancient world, the mouse was a symbol of prophetic power, because mice, like the fumes used by the oracles, come out of the ground. Apollo's arrival in Greece may have followed the destruction of the Mycenaean civilization. A familiar detail on Apollo's battle with a great serpent is provided in the Homeric hymn to Apollo, composed in 522 BC, when the archaic period in Greek history was giving way to the classical period. This may have referred to his conflict with Gaia, the goddess of the earth, which is represented by the legend of Apollo's slaying of Gaia's daughter, the serpent Python. As an earth deity, Python had power over the underworld world. The Python was also the deity behind the oracle. A version of the Apollo versus Python story related by Hyginus, 64 BC to 17 AD, tells us that when Leto was pregnant with Artemis and Apollo, the jealous Hera sent the Python to pursue Leto throughout the lands to prevent her from giving birth to the twin gods. Later, Apollo pursued the Python to avenge his mother's plight. He made his way to Mount Parnassus, where the serpent dwelled, and chased it all the way to the oracle of Gaia at Delphi. Apollo then penetrated the sacred precinct and killed the Python with his arrows beside the rock cleft on which the priestess sat on her tripod. In his book, The Greek Myths, Robert Graves tells us that to placate local opinion at Delphi, regular funeral games were instituted in honor. The Python and Gaia's priestess was retained in office. The priestess became known as the Pythia and over time became associated with Apollo. This brings to mind another hero god, Marduk, in the religion of ancient Babylon, who slayed the great serpent Tiamat, the embodiment of primordial chaos. Marduk then forms the heavens and the earth from Tiamat's dismembered body. After Apollo took over the Temple of Delphi, the Greeks then expanded on this quality and created the legalism, supervision, of the orders of the gods and the demand for moderation and harmony. This led to the elevation of Apollo to become the god of shining youth, ideal beauty, fine arts, philosophy, moderation, spiritual life, music, as well as divine law and order. The idea that diseases and death come from invisible shots from arrows sent by supernatural beings also appears in Germanic, Norse, and Hindu mythology. The elf shot is a medical condition described in Anglo-Saxon medical texts, such as vid firstis, against a sudden/violent stabbing pain, an Old English medical text surviving in the collection, known now as Laknunga, remedies. The ancient belief of the elf shot is that it is caused by elves shooting invisible arrows at a person or animal and cause sudden shooting pains in a particular area of the body. The Vedic Rudra could also bring diseases with his arrows. However, he was also able to free people of them. An oracular cult have existed in Delphi from the Mycenaean age. In historical times, the priests of Delphi were called Labriadae, the double-axe men, which indicates Minoan origin. Labris, the double axe, was also the holy symbol of the Cretan labyrinth. Artemis, the Greek goddess of hunting, was identified as Britomartis or Dictina, the Minoan Potnia Theron, mistress of the animals, worshipped in Crete. In ancient art from the Mediterranean world as well as the ancient Near East, the mistress of animals is a widespread motif, depicting a human-like female figure with two animals, one on either side. In her earliest depictions, Britomartis is accompanied by the master of the animals, a male figure of hunting who carried a bow. The master of the animals is also a very widespread motif in the art of Egypt and the ancient Near East. Unless he is shown with specific divine attributes, the master of the animals is typically described as a hero. The male figure may be standing, such as the figures found in the 4th millennium BC artworks, or kneeling on one knee, as found in artworks from the 3rd millennium BC. At the top of the Gebel el-Arak knife, an Egyptian prehistoric ivory and flint knife from the Naqada II period, which started around 3450 BC, shows some Mesopotamian influence, where two lions wrestle with a male figure in Mesopotamian dress. The Pashupati seal from the Indus Valley Civilization, 2500 to 1500 BC, shows a male figure seated in a yoga-like posture, with a horned headdress and surrounded by animals. Shiva's epithet is also Pashupati. which means the lord of cattle. Later, the Greek god shown as master of animals is Apollo, brother of Artemis. As the god who nurtures and protects children and young boys, Apollo oversees children's education and their passage into adulthood. There are also many stories of Apollo taking young men under his wings. Unlike other centaurs who were born from Ixion and the cloud nymph Nephele, Chiron was sired by the titan Coronis when he had taken the form of a horse and impregnated the sea nymph Philaria. Out of shame and disgust, Philaria abandoned Chiron soon after giving birth to him. Apollo later found Chiron, took him under his wing, and taught him the art of music, archery, medicine, and prophecy. Chiron's kindness and intelligence, as well as his uniquely peaceful character compared to other centaurs, are attributed to Apollo's influence. Chiron would later become such a great teacher himself that Apollo entrusted his own son, Asclepius, to him for further education. Like Chiron, Apollo's own son Aeneas was also abandoned by his mother soon after his birth. Apollo took him in and educated him in the art of divination and prophecies. Later, Aeneas became the king of Delos, as well as a priest of Apollo. When Evadne went into labor with another of Apollo's son Iamus, Apollo sent the Moirai to assist his lover, and sent snakes to feed baby Iamus some honey after he was born. When Iamus reached the age of education, Apollo took him to Olympia and taught him the art of understanding and explaining the languages of birds. Iamus later founded the Iamidai dynasty, a dynasty of priests from Olympia. Apollo also educated another one of his son, Idmon, to be a seer. Although Idmon later foresaw his death that would happen if he joined the Argonauts on their journey, Idmon embraced his destiny and died a brave death. To commemorate his son's bravery, Apollo commanded Boeotians to build a town around the tomb of Idmon to honor him. Apollo also adopted Coronis, the abandoned son of Zeus and Europa, and educated him to be a seer. Apart from Apollo's kindness toward his young charges, a more intriguing aspect of the life of Apollo is his love affairs. The vivid anecdotal qualities of these stories have made some of them favorites of painters since the Renaissance, thus making them stand out more prominently in the modern imagination. However, this does not mean that Apollo's love affairs have always been successful. And it is his failed love affairs which give us a picture of the crueler aspects of Apollo. Daphne was a nymph who scorned Apollo's advances. In his Fabulae, the 2nd century AD mythographer Pseudo-Hyginus says, "When Apollo was pursuing the virgin Daphne, daughter of the river Peneus, she begged for protection from Terra, Gaia, who took her in and changed her into a laurel tree. Apollo cuts the tree, thus dismembering Daphne, and fashioned its leaves as a crown upon his head. The myth explains the origin of the laurel tree and its connection of Apollo. Another lover of Apollo was Coronis. Apollo laid with Coronis, and she soon got pregnant with his child. Later, when Apollo was away, Coronis fell in love with Ischys and slept with him in secret. According to Ovid, after learning about the pregnancy of Coronis, Apollo had appointed a white raven to guard her. After discovering Coronis's affair with Ischys, the raven reported his findings to Apollo. Apollo killed the couple and made the raven black in rage, scorching it as a punishment for failing to fulfill his duties. Thus today the ravens are black. Apollo shot his arrows at Coronis and Ischys. When Coronis was laid on her funeral pyre, Apollo cut open her stomach and saved his unborn child. The boy was called Asclepius, who later became the god of medicine. Deiphobe, best known as the Sibyl of Cumae, is identified by Virgil in his Aeneid as coming from 100 perforations in the rock, 100 mouths from which the many utterances rush. 43 to 50, 163. The Sibyl, or at least frenzied women speaking in the voice of the gods, were also documented in the Near East, as in Mari in the 2nd millennium, and in Assyria in the 1st millennium. In 5 BC, the Greek writer Heraclitus is the first known writer to mention the Sibyl, when he writes, The Sibyl, with a frenzied mouth, uttering things not to be laughed at, unadorned and unperfumed, and with the help of the god, completes 1,000 years with her voice. Apollo himself was the god helping the Sibyl's voice. The first of the Greek Sibyls was a woman called Hierophile, who was sometimes identified as Apollo's daughter, sister, or wife, sometimes as a fisherman's child, or even a nymph. Hierophile is said to have come from the Troad, Biga Peninsula in northwestern Anatolia, Turkey, to Delphi before the Trojan War. She then lingered at Samos for some time before visiting Claros and Delos. She died in the Troad after surviving 9 generations of men. After her death, Hierophile became a roaming voice that still carried her prophecies wrapped in dark enigmas. A more common myth was that the Sibyls Deiphobe, Marpessa, and Cassandra were the objects of Apollo's desire. The gift of prophecy offered by Apollo in this sense was an act of sexual interest. Marpessa, the first of these women to receive the gift of prophecy, received it when she was taken from her husband to Mount Ida by Apollo. She then acted as his prophetess, in which capacity she foretold the tragic destiny of Troy. Isolated by the mighty god at Mount Ida, Marpessa was no longer able to return to her husband and the life she knew. She therefore became slave of Apollo in the sense that she was granted a new and irrevocable gift and orders in a manner that compels her to obey. Cassandra, the princess of Troy, rejected the advances made by Apollo after embracing his gift of prophecy. In anger, Apollo transforms her gift into a curse by giving her warning of danger, and yet restricting her prophecies so that the people around her will not understand or believe them in time to prevent any catastrophe, thereby making her gift useless. Deiphobe, who later became the Sibyl of Cumae, was also held captive by Apollo. Susan Skolsky, in The Sibyl's Rage and the Marpessan Rock, 1987, compares Apollo's violent intrusion into Deiphobe's body to rape, as she loses all control of her faculties and is forced to submit to Apollo's will. Although Deiphobe resisted the advances of Apollo, he finds another way to occupy her forcefully. As Apollo fills her body and forces her to speak his messages, Deiphobe appears insane. The words spoken are not hers, and she does not have the choice of whether she would speak them or not. After possessing her, Apollo further abused Deiphobe by cursing her to age despite also giving her immortality. A similar depiction is in Book 14 of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which also portrays the Sibyl of Cumae as a victim of imprisonment by Apollo. Further, apart from her imprisonment by Apollo himself, the Sibyl of Cumae also becomes a prisoner in her own decaying body, and later within her jar. According to Ovid and Petronius, the Sibyl of Cumae is cursed to live a long life of prophecy, as her body withers away to the weight of a feather. Later in her life, her body was small enough to be hung in a jar in her cave, lamenting and wishing that a day will come when she will finally be allowed to die. When Zeus struck down Apollo's son Asclepius with a lightning bolt for resurrecting the dead, Apollo killed the Cyclopes in revenge, as it was them who had fashioned the bolt for Zeus. Due to Apollo's mother Leto's intervention, Zeus would have banished Apollo to Tartarus. Instead, Zeus sentenced Apollo to 1 year of hard labor under King Admetus. Throughout the Trojan War, Apollo held a grudge against Achilles because Achilles had killed his son Tennis before the war began and violently assassinated his son Troilus in his own temple. Apollo caused the death of Achilles by directing Paris' arrow to the heel of Achilles. The cruel fate of Niobe, the queen of Thebes and wife of Amphion, was prophesied by Apollo himself while he was still in Leto's womb. Niobe boasted that she was superior to Leto because she had 14 children while Leto had only 2. Niobe further mocked Apollo's and Artemis's appearances. Apollo then killed Niobe's sons while Artemis killed her daughters. At the sight of his dead children, Amphion killed himself in grief. The devastated Niobe fled to Mount Sipilos and turned into stone as she wept. Her tears formed the river Achelous.